Welcome to Canonical. I'm James Shown. I'm joined, as always, by Iad Darris and Sam Spieler.
Hey,
Hey,
Hello, hello. Today we are discussing the second book in our series on contemporary Nigerian fiction with Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's Americana. If you are a first-time listener, we also have a book club discussion on Reddit. If you'd like to join us, you can find that at Canonical Pod. That link is also in our episode description. We are also on social media at Canonical Pod, all one word. And if you'd like to support us and your local bookstore, you can use our bookshop.org link. That's also in our episode description. Our review of this book was published last week. And next week, we will review our next book, Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo.
so I wanted to start with a little comparison in a way to one of our other recent books, The Buddha in the Attic. Much like in that book, we are told in Americanah that when people return to Nigeria from the US, there's this assumption that the returner has failed in some way. And through Ifemelu, Adichie is challenging that idea. It complicates the African diaspora by featuring a return not in shame, but in celebration and hope. Do you feel that we have a real balance, though, or a real draw back to Nigeria for Ifemelu? Obinze, to me, seems like the real single draw for her. And even Obinze didn't choose to return to Nigeria, but he was forced, though he also did not try to leave again. We get a lot of critiques, subtle and not, about Nigeria, such as power cuts and institutionalized corruption, unemployment, Christian fundamentalism. But this is also the Nigeria that Ifemelu not just chooses, but wants to return to, despite these issues and in light of the positives.
This is kind of a callback to what we talked about last episode when we talked about how Ifemelu's plot is kind of mushy. Her conflict is not clear. I think the problem is that we just don't really know exactly why she decides to go back. Unless I'm missing something here. Did you read anything into that? Like, did you feel like you had a firm idea of why she decided to go back to Nigeria?
No, for me, I felt that she missed Nigeria, but it was more that she started thinking more about Obinze, even though she doesn't talk about him that often while she's in America, but also that she felt that mushiness herself and didn't feel at home in the US.
For me, that's what it was, I think. That's the closest I can get to a firm answer. I think she establishes the fact that as an African immigrant in America, she is forced to fit into the black white dynamics of America when she, in fact, does not really fit in. So, because of that, she's always got this sense of not belonging. So, you kind of see that with her relationship with Blaine. At the beginning of the book, you are presented with a relationship as if it's a very happy relationship. You know, you're wondering why doesn't she just stay with him because he seems like quite the catch. And then by the middle or end of the book, you realize, oh, well, they actually don't really belong together. The two of them are incompatible, not just because they're incompatible as people, but because she doesn't fit into Blaine's blackness in America.
I think one of the characters, I believe it's Ifemelu, says something to the effect of that it's easier to live in Nigeria. There's a simplicity to it. And I don't mean that in terms of like the people are simple or the living itself is simple, but I think going to what you're saying now, that she understands the politics and the social aspects of Nigeria better than she feels she ever will in America.
there's a part in the novel where she's thinking about her past relationships and she's thinking about the difference between Obinze and her past boyfriends. And she's just kind of enjoying being with somebody who understands and not needing to explain. And that I think is kind of encapsulating the entirety of why she has returned to Nigeria. It's the feeling at home and not just the absence of tension, but the absence of this knowledge gap where you have to explain what is different between African and African American and what's different between Nigeria and the rest of Africa. There is this kind of innate unspoken knowledge that is pleasurable when you're at home, that is missing whenever you're abroad, no matter how comfortable the other place is. And I think the other thing that Adichie is trying to focus on in this novel is ownership. Africans taking ownership of Africa, and specifically Nigerians taking ownership of Nigeria. And I think that's another reason why she wants to go back, is because she wants to own her country and care for her country in a way that it needs to be cared for.
So, building off of this, in her 2009 TED Talk, The Danger of a Single Story, Adichie warns of how only knowing one thing or story about a person or country, or worse, a whole continent, can lead to gross oversimplification and critical lack of understanding. With what we're given about Nigeria before and after the character's returns, does Americana distance itself enough from that problem of a single story about Nigeria? Or do you think it feeds into that?
I think one problem with this question is I think debunking that myth of the single story is it's a split responsibility. It's as much the responsibility of the listener as the storyteller, or the reader, I guess, in this case, and the storyteller. A storyteller can only do so much via portrayals of complex situations to allow for a more nuanced understanding of other cultures. So in Americana, I thought Adichie did well to depict the experience of the African immigrant in America. And I thought she did well to portray African Americans, people born in America, though I thought that portrayal was a little less nuanced. And I thought she did a good job in sort of describing how she views blackness and how that works in America. So if the aim is to present a complex America, I thought she did a pretty good job in the book, more than what other writers often do when they're describing America and its complicated history with race. I thought she portrayed Nigeria in a similarly complex manner also. It was mainly focused on the middle class, though, and this, I think, did a lot to counter the prevailing view of, the poor African country, that view that's widely held by non-Africans. So overall, yeah, I thought as much as an author can present a complex view of another culture, I thought she did pretty well.
This is kind of what I was talking about in the previous episode with Adichie's politics and whether these people are interesting because they are successful or whether they are interesting people who happen to be successful. I think that it's important that these people are middle class because that's the second story or the third or fourth story that this novel can tell to non African readers. I found this interesting passage at the end of chapter 9. Obinze is in London at a dinner party, and the other guests, he's thinking, understand fleeing from war, they understand fleeing from poverty, but they would not understand the need to escape from the oppressive lethargy of choicelessness. They would not understand why people like him, who were raised well fed and watered, but mired in dissatisfaction, conditioned from birth to look towards somewhere else, eternally convinced that real lives happened in that somewhere else, were now resolved to do dangerous things, illegal things, so as to leave, none of them starving or raped or from burned villages, but merely hungry for choice and certainty. That to me, I think, is a really important quote because it shows a new aspect of African people and a new aspect of immigrants in general. And that to me, I think, is the new story that this novel can bring to the conversation.
The funny thing about that as well is even though it is doing a good job of complicating what life in Africa is like, more specifically, life in Nigeria, But it also just describes people who are from third world countries generally as well. Like, even though, the whole point is to avoid simplification and to avoid having a single story of another culture, if you're from a country where you don't have the luxuries of the first world, the safety, of America, you encounter these problems. So, like, we all lived in China for a pretty significant amount of time. A lot of what is described here, you could also apply to China as well. So that's the irony of it, I think, is like, in some ways, this could apply to like almost any third world country that isn't a failed state like Sudan, right? Like, people in the third world are not, getting raped all the time, or, they're not just getting killed willy-nilly. It's just our perception of those countries.
I guess what I'm getting at is I felt there was some imbalance between the space that America is given versus the space that Nigeria is given. And I think we see more of a modern Nigeria at the end of the novel. As Ifemelu is going out to dinner and checking out the scene, seeing up and coming places. But I still didn't feel like I saw much of that. But when I was thinking on this question, I realized that even though I was a little disappointed that I didn't really feel like I was getting a full taste for Nigeria, I did realize that her characters do a lot of that work for her, I think. In the last episode, James, you mentioned there might be too many characters. That might be, but I think it does go to this point that there is not just one type of person in Nigeria, that there are a lot of different variations of people. For example, Obinze's mother is very different from Ifemelu's family. Like Ifemelu's father, from what I remember, he's
a buffoon, right?
but it's not just that. He's ashamed of his lack of understanding. Like, he knows that he doesn't know things, if that makes sense. There's a sadness to him.
Is he the guy who got fired because he wouldn't call someone mummy?
Yes, I think so.
Oh, I didn't view him as a buffoon.
His buffoonery comes into play with his attitudes toward success and his attitudes toward sophistication. He lacks a certain kind of confidence that he overcompensates for with a worship of this kind of veneer of intelligence or the veneer of foreignness, which I think makes him a buffoon. That's the way I read him.
And her mother is very religious, kind of to a ridiculous level. But Abenze's mother is this very learned person who Ifemelu thinks about often throughout her life. And I think we get to know her quite a bit.
So, Sam, are you listing these characters because you're saying they shows the diversity of Nigeria?
Yeah, I think they tell a more complicated story.
And are you saying that it is not the case in America? That the characters presented to us in America do not tell a more complicated story?
No, I'm saying that originally I was more disappointed with how Nigeria is portrayed because I felt like I didn't get a good sense of what Nigeria actually looked like. I saw a lot of the problems of Nigeria, but I didn't get a lot of the positives. I felt like I was still getting that single story. But through the characters, I think I'm getting more of a variation.
I think that the way Adichie would like us to feel about Nigeria is it is an ascendant country. It's a country on the way up. And it has these problems, but it's moving towards something greater. And I think that we see that in the presence of all of these foreign restaurants that they go to and these kind of middle class lifestyles that they have with their drivers and their cooks and all of these kind of material comforts that the middle and upper class has in Nigeria. I think that In some sense, this is what I mean by it being a very conservative novel. And here I'm thinking in contrast to our previous novel, The Death of Vivek Oji, which I think is a very transgressive novel. I think that Adichie's view of a successful Nigeria, it's very much the traditional view of material wealth and comfort. That's what success means for her, and that's what she wants from her country. Whereas I think that a novelist like Emezi looks at their country and wants to shake things up. And that definitely is not what Adichie wants to do.
When I'm reading these Nigerian sections, I just feel like I'm back in China. I've got my IE. For a while, I had a driver. That's what it felt like to me. I was like, yeah, it's China life. Random people getting rich. All these rich dudes have mistresses. You go to a party and then suddenly someone offers you a job. That's like China life, baby.
Do you think that's a legitimate aspiration? Like, is this what people should be wanting from their lives in their country? I guess that's the bigger question for me because I do think that this novel is about Nigeria and Nigeria's future, but is Adichie's goal a goal that you can share?
You labeled it as an ascendant country, and that's the parallel to China is that if you're in an ascendant country, these kinds of opportunities for upward mobility are available to you and they're desirable because in your parents' generation that they were not available. So I think it is a desire that's particular to a country in a certain level of economic development. As to whether or not I think it's desirable, I mean, this is something we've talked about in regards to China. Like, I think for people coming out of poverty, it is definitely desirable for them. It feels like for me, someone who grew up in the US, I don't know if I have the right to tell those people, hey, your parents were broke, your grandparents almost died from famine. You shouldn't worry about money so much, you know? Like, it makes total sense for these people to want to secure their futures, to live in a country where, you don't starve to death. So, in that way, I can understand it. I think that if there's like a country version of the Maslow hierarchy of needs, like if you grew up in the US, you probably, not, of course, not everyone, but you probably don't face the kinds of difficulties that the parents or grandparents of Adichie had to face, right? You're not worried about, political upheaval to the point where maybe there's going to be riots in the street. Like calling back to our previous book, you might get caught up in the riot and just die because you don't fit in. I mean, this is the privileged view of the middle class American. Obviously, if you grew up black during civil rights, then yes, that could very well happen to you.
I guess what I'm looking for here, and I'm not sure if I should, is a concern for justice. And justice is a lofty goal, but I do feel like what this novel presupposes is that there is no need for justice until you have money. And I think a novel like The Death of Vivek Oji would say that justice comes before money or the pursuit of money. And I'm not sure where I sit. I just want to note that it does seem like a very conservative worldview and something that I'm not terribly sure I can endorse at the moment, though I do admit it's still kind of an open question. In general, I do think that this is a very patriotic novel. It has a love for Nigeria in its heart. And I think that that love for Nigeria, it emerges in relief in contrast to the character's fascination with foreign things at the beginning. The arc that I was referring to, it stretches from the beginning of the novel, where you have people like Ifemelu's father and Obinze having this kind of naive and foolish fascination with the other towards a more sophisticated relationship with the outside world. It moves from that foolish xenophilia towards kind of the ignorance that we find in America, ignorance of the outsider that we find in Kurt. to what I might call wounded patriotism in Obinze's mother, because she seems to love Nigeria, but in a very specific way. And it's very disappointing to her when her country doesn't meet her expectations. The next step I'd see is kind of a danger or warning of the dangers of Western ideology that we find in Blaine as a character. And then it finally kind of rests on Ifemelo and Obinze at the end of the novel as kind of a paradigm of Nigerian culture or Nigerian people. They're almost like new people. And that to me, I think, is a move that may almost redeem the ending of the novel that I was dissatisfied with, because it shows how their union can be integrated into kind of a larger and more important theme of the novel rather than just this will they or won't they romance. I think it adds some sort of significance to their relationship.
So, do you see Obinze's decision to leave his family? Is that indicative of kind of a progress in Nigeria?
What I think the progress is not his decision to leave his family, but his decision to live by a certain type of values. And I think that this is as close as the novel gets towards justice, is that Obinze is willing to sacrifice the quote unquote stable and secure family life that he has for a relationship built on a meeting of intellectual equals and a relationship on real passion. Like that, I think, is what Adichie is advocating with that relationship. And I think that it's important to Adichie's conception of Nigeria that people move past this sort of tacky materialism that she sees in their society. But I don't think that she is willing to throw out material conquest as a kind of measure of society, but she just wants it to be one measure rather than the only measure.
I can buy into this kind of reading, except I think it is not handled very well. So, in this case, the reader, us, we have to bring a lot to the table to draw that out.
The reason why I bring this to the table and the reason why I draw it out is because I like this novel a lot. And the first 80% of the novel was very good. But the last section of the novel, the will they or won't they section, really disappointed me. It was a transition from a very keenly observed and very intellectually interesting examination of race and society to this very kind of mass market relationship drama. And for me to rescue this novel, the most charitable thing I can do is to say that her interest in a Nigerian partner is connected to an interest in Nigerian patriotism, an interest in Nigeria as a country. And I think that to me is why Ifemelu and Obinze are such strong characters and such perfect people. Like they are not flawless people, but they do seem almost paragons of virtue. Ifemelu especially has her flaws, but she's always so righteous and so smart. And Obinze is so humble, but so smart and so charismatic that it's difficult to see them as actual people rather than as symbols of some sort of idealized person. Do you think that Obinze and Ifemelu are written the way they are to prove a point or to show us something?
I can see that, but I didn't read that while I was reading. So when it ends abruptly the way it does, is there some meaning you can ascribe to that? Like, is this a new beginning? I mean, like something larger than just the two of them. Is this something like what you're saying about their relationship in general by choosing each other, by choosing another Nigerian, built not on materialistic things, but on, I guess, love? What does it mean that it ends so abruptly?
Well, I think Adichie is smart enough that she knows that the happy ending is not going to be satisfying for a lot of serious readers. And she doesn't want to tell you everything, but I think she's gesturing towards something. Like when these two quote unquote superpowers are together, it's the start of something new. Like, I really feel like Obinze is so perfect in contrast with all of the other men, all of the other Nigerian men, and even non Nigerian men that we see in this novel, that he stands out. Why does he stand out?
You do point out that he does stand out compared to all the other men, not just the American men, but Nigerian men also. So by them choosing each other, how is that much different from her choosing another Nigerian man?
Well, I mean, the other Nigerian men that we meet in this novel all are flawed in very specific ways. You have the chief, who's very kind of boisterous and obnoxious. You have the general, who's a Lothario and very unpleasant physically. You have the other guys who are very kind of obsequious, like what's his friend in London who's married to Georgina? He's very concerned with showing off and telling stupid stories again and again. Like you have lots of characters, but they're all pointedly flawed in some way, except for Obinze.
I guess what I'm saying is I get your point about the patriotism, but in light of all of the other characters, how is it patriotism if the other characters also represent facets of Nigeria?
The patriotism, I guess, is that Adichie wants us to choose a certain kind of Nigerian. And she wants to advocate for people like Obinze and for people like Ifemelu. And these are the new people that she thinks should be valued in her society. I think that's the point. That's the contrast that emerges.
So, slightly different from what we're talking about exactly just now. I'm looking at the last chapter and I just think it sucks. I just read it. It's very short. It's like 4 pages. And the way I read it is someone told her, an editor or an agent was like, "You got to put them back together, baby. Like people have been reading 580 pages. You got to put them back together." That's what it reads like to me. The section right before it ends with she's in bed with Fred and it says if only she could feel what she wanted to feel. Page break. And then Obinze shows up and he has all her letters. And then, he says, "Ifem, I'm chasing you. I'm going to chase you until you give this a chance." That's terrible. I just think it's an awful, awful ending to this book just because of how abrupt it is. Like, she should have ended this a chapter earlier and she could have kept all of that we were talking about, the kind of possibility of the future that he's the one, but she still needs to decide. All of that is in the book. Why even have this last chapter? Man, I'm really hung up on how terrible this last 2 pages is. It is just awful. As an ending to this book, I mean. The writing is fine.
What about not having the entire section where they go back to Nigeria and just having the final part of the novel being her on the airplane about to land in Lagos? Like that to me would be a strong novel, but in a different way. And I think it would work much better and be more symmetrical in terms of the structure of the entire story rather than having this kind of tagged on section.
I like the part with Nigeria. I think, though, what you're saying is right. Like, the book could have ended with her boarding the flight, and a lot of the gravitas of the novel could have been heightened because the reader will just draw their own conclusions. But at the same time, I actually do like some of what she wrote about in that's set in Nigeria. I think it is important for us to see these different characters in Nigeria. So I see what you mean. I think that would be maybe a stronger work, but it wouldn't be a complete work because it doesn't get into all the other ideas that we were just talking about. I'll read this portion. I mean, this is the closest you can get to drawing out some kind of meaning, some kind of complexity in this last scene. Obinze says, "I know we could accept the things we can't be for each other and even turn it into the poetic tragedy of our lives." I mean, it's well written, but honestly, that sentence not so good. Or we could act. I want to act. I want this to happen. Once again, okay, like written well, but whatever. Kosi is a good woman, and my marriage was a kind of floating along contentment. But I should never have married her. I always knew that something was missing. I want to raise Bucci. I want to see her every day, but I've been pretending all these months, and one day she'll be old enough to know I'm pretending. I moved out of the house today. I'll stay in my flat in Parkview for now, and I hope to see Bucci every day if I can. I know it's taking me too long, and I know you're moving on, and I completely understand if you're ambivalent and need time. Like, if you look at this paragraph, which is supposed to be the capstone paragraph, this paragraph is supposed to hammer in some resonance for you as a reader. Really, the only thing I can pick out here is that he's talking about how his marriage was a kind of floating along contentment, and he should have never done it, and something was missing. But we already got that earlier. So you got to do a lot of work here to draw out this one, kernel of meaning here, which is that she's maybe putting forward a certain vision of what people should be like in Nigeria. They should strive for something more than a floating along contentment, right? Like that passage should be really important. That's the only thing I take away from it. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm with you, Iad. I think you can read some, you can add meaning and get something from this, but you got to do a lot of work, I think, to pull it out.
Well, think about the situation that I mentioned earlier, where we don't see Nigeria at the end of the novel. I think what would be missing from that would be this image of an ascendant Nigeria seen through mature Ifimelo's eyes. I think that's very important to Adichie. That's something that she wants to have in the novel because she wants her readers to understand Nigeria the way that Ifemelo understands it. And if we ended the novel with her leaving America, looking off into the future, feeling very ambivalent, it wouldn't supply that sort of patriotic feeling or that sort of feeling like I have to do something with my country, which I think is very important to Adichie. So I think that this reading that I'm offering, it's not only rescuing this final chapter of the novel, but the entire final third of the novel where she goes back to Nigeria. Because, I mean, my personal taste is that a character looking off into an unknown future is very poignant and interesting. And that to me is what I would have liked as the end of the novel. But it's quite obvious that Adichie has dodged that and she has avoided that kind of poignance to go for something else. And what I'm trying to figure out is why has she made that choice? And for me, it just seems like she's made that choice because she wants to show you the value of modern Nigeria.
I'm with you on that reading, except for the last chapter, which I think is not well written. I mean, her prose is still good, but in terms of the meaning that she's trying to, present in the book, I think the last chapter falls flat.
Another thing I want to talk about is just kind of the shape of the narrative because as I mentioned, the first three quarters of the novel is framed in America inside of Ifemelo's visit to a hair salon. And the framing device ends just before she returns to Lagos, which I think creates an asymmetry in the novel that I found slightly unpleasant. Is that symmetry or the absence of symmetry important? Does it matter in what I'm reading as a Bildungsroman?
I didn't mind it, but the asymmetry, I think, was really felt to me in the pacing once she returns to Nigeria. I don't think the asymmetry is really part of the problem, except that it just felt unbalanced. I wasn't really thinking about it in terms of a Bildungsroman, even though you're right, that's what this is. But because of that, I also wasn't really thinking too heavily about some perfect symmetry. Do you think a Bildungsroman has to have symmetry?
I don't think it has to be symmetrical, but I think that the framing device works well with the Bildungsroman Because of the resonance of the hair salon in African American and African culture, specifically in light of other races of people who have different kinds of hair, it works very well in my mind to encapsulate this role that African Americans and Africans have in American society. And it worked really well in my reading as a kind of a bookend on either end of the narrative. And then when we leave America and we leave that bookending behind, I felt like the remaining part of the novel was just there kind of dangling in the breeze. It didn't have that nice sort of symmetry or that nice sort of framing that this resonant scene of a hair salon can provide.
I don't know how much I enjoyed those scenes, even though I got why they were there. All the characters that we see throughout this book have these different prejudices and blindnesses, I guess, these nationalistic blindnesses. And those characters in the hair salon aren't saved from that, but it's kind of this nice home for her. And I agree that it does give these bookend feeling, but I didn't really like those scenes very much. It always took me out of the story.
I agree with you, Sam, in that I also didn't really like the hair salon scenes. I thought the idea of this structure, this kind of framing structure, is fine. And I think it can totally work, even if it's, as you described, yet, even if it's asymmetrical. The problem I have with it is this kind of structure works really well for two reasons. And in my mind, it needs to do both. First, it provides a kind of lattice for the flashbacks in the work. And secondly, through this interplay, when you flash back and then you flash to the salon again, you need to have some kind of link, some either thematic link or resonance between them. And while it serves as this kind of lattice or skeleton for the first, three-fourths of the book or first five sections, it doesn't actually do the latter. It doesn't, when you flash back, provide any extra resonance. Sometimes she gives you a great scene in flashback, and then you go back to the hair salon scene and it seems almost entirely unrelated. That's what I don't like about it.
Her hairdresser is really consumed by the question of whether Igbo women have to marry Igbo men. And Ifemelu is really resistant to that at the beginning, but then softens on it. And in the end, that is what she ends up doing. So there is that, but I still agree that it doesn't feel a strong enough point. I wonder if that's because we see that before she returns to Lagos.
Well, I mean, what I'm saying is not even that like very general point, but what I'm saying is if you have this kind of framework, every time you flash back and then, flash forward again to the hair salon, the best works play off of that flashback. Like when you flash back, whatever you flash back to needs to relate to what just happened in the hair salon. And it needs to have some kind of resonance. And I don't think it's related. I think, this hair salon scene is almost its own scene, and then it got chopped up and interspersed. That's how it reads to me. And that's what I don't like about it. The scene itself, I thought was fine. I mean, she had to drag it out because, it is this structure that she's trying to employ. But the scene itself is fine in that Aisha, kind of parallels her own helplessness in certain parts of her being an American and shows how she's kind of changed over time. Like she's someone who used to be helpless, like Aisha, and then she's become someone who's gained a sense of power or prestige in America via her blog. Like that's a fine point to make, but the problem is, that's it. Like I don't think the scene provides much else. So, it's just a bit weak.
No, I really disagree with both of you. I think that the hair salon is really important for this novel. First of all, I think that hair salon as a symbol for the Black individual in America, for the African diaspora in America is an incredibly potent symbol. It's something that exists only in America because when you leave and go back to Lagos, there are no African salons. They're just salons, right? Like this is an encapsulation of the diaspora. And because it's an encapsulation of the entire diaspora, you have this very interesting mix of classes and mix of people that happens where you have the very interesting contrast between Ifemelo, who has been in the US for 17 years, and these other characters who haven't been there for that long, and the way that they kind of eat differently and speak differently, and the different films that they watch, and all of it. It's not directly tied into the following scene or the preceding scene, but it's all of a piece. Like everything that we find in the salon is found throughout the entire novel, even if it's not in the next scene.
I mean, why not just have it as a standalone scene? Why have it as a framing structure?
I think the reason why it has to be a frame, or the reason why it works as a frame, is because number one, it provides an occasion for Ifemelu to think retrospectively, to think back on her life, because braids take a long time. There's a lot of time to think. Number two, because it's a symbol of something that works in the American context but doesn't work elsewhere. So it works very well as this ongoing touchstone for what Ifemelu is in America, what her role is in America. And number three, it allows us to jump backwards and forwards from scene to scene in a way that would probably feel less natural or less convincing without these kind of framing chapters thrown into the novel. Because we move from Nigeria to America and back, from this year to that year and back, it's a very useful glue to put two parts of the world and two parts of time together.
It's a little bit cute where she kind of braids, the hair salon scenes into the book while she's getting her hair braided. That's a little too cute for me. Just a little bit.
Oh, I didn't notice that, but yeah, that is cute. What about Dike's attempted suicide? Like, I don't know how to feel about that.
Black people get depressed too, man.
That's true, but why have it in the novel? Like, why is it there?
I think to start the conversation of depression, because we know that if Emelu is depressed, she has trouble putting that to words. I think Dike opens that door maybe and allows her to start thinking in terms of this very American idea of depression.
That's interesting because I read it as like opening a door and then nobody walked through it. Like it just happened and then, yeah, what else? Like I didn't see it kind of reverberate throughout the other characters other than, obviously they all felt very sorry for him and they were concerned, but why is it there?
Well, this might be a reach on my part. I don't know, but that's the only thing I can see is that DK tries to kill himself, and when Ifemelu is talking with Auntie Uju and trying to make sense of this, Uju doesn't understand the idea of depression at all because she's too Nigerian and she still sees things in just a Nigerian way. So the whole idea of depression doesn't make sense to her. That's something that only Americans can have. And she continually says that Dike is not black. He is not a black American. He's Nigerian.
I read that a bit differently, actually. I think, well, first, yeah, I agree with you. I think it is an opening of a door that we don't really walk through. I don't think there's enough of a payoff. But for me, I read it as Dike is representative of someone with a split identity. He is Nigerian because he grows up in a Nigerian household. He was born in Nigeria, but he also grows up in America. So he's both. And for me, it goes to this kind of incompatibility. Even though he's moved to this new school, he's very popular, he has friends, there's still something within him that doesn't work. Like he just can't fit. He's both Nigerian and American. It just doesn't work.
So is he suicidal because he's a Nigerian in America? Like, is it a commentary on being African in America?
I think so, because it also, for me, resonates with the section, I think, where he complains about his name. He doesn't like his name, and then I think his mom just says, "Well, it's your name." Am I imagining this? Like, I think there's a section in the book that says this, right?
I don't remember, but it sounds kind of familiar.
I could be just making things up and finding a way to improve this book. But yeah, for me, that's how I read it, is that he doesn't fit in because of how he's got the Nigerian influence.
The only thing I could pair it with is that when he later goes to Lagos and visits Ifemelu, and he's very happy there, and he says, "Oh, I really like being here. Maybe I could stay here." Ifemelu is very happy, and she wants to tell him, "Oh, you can come right away." Like, it seems like it could be integrated into that patriotic reading that I was mentioning earlier, but it just seems very crude. Like, be an American, want to die, or be happy in Nigeria. I don't think that that gives Adichie enough credit.
I don't see it as that. I think it's more of a commentary on assimilation.
Well, and it's also something that we haven't really talked about is migration. And this challenges the typical idea of migration that we see in a lot of, especially American books, but immigration to America books, where that's like the end all be all. That's the hope and dream. And that's what happens in the beginning of the book. Auntie Uju encourages Ifemelu to come stay with her. So now we're seeing the opposite happen. We talked about the prostitution scene. That happens really early on in Ifemelu's stay there. But now we're seeing kind of the opposite direction. When Dike comes and visits Ifemelu, we see it as a very positive thing. So it's kind of like seeing the reverse in the mirror.
Okay, let's pause here for a short break. When we come back, we'll talk about who the intended audience of this book is. We'll be right back. Hi. If you liked Americana, you might also want to listen to a series we did some time ago, Race in Contemporary America. We read Sag Harbor by Colson Whitehead, The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, and There by Tommy Orange. We also did a series on immigration called The Impossibility of a New Home. For that series, we read Austerlitz by W.G. Sebald, The Buddha in the Attic by Julie Otsuka, and Signs Preceding the End of the World by Yuri Herrera. And the series before that was Afrofuturism. In Afrofuturism, we read Parable of the Sower by Octavia Butler, Colson Whitehead's The Intuitionist, our second Colson Whitehead, and Ishmael Reed's Mumbo Jumbo. You can find these episodes in our archives. Check them out. Welcome back. Do you think Americana is meant for a Nigerian audience or an American audience?
I think it works both ways. I think that with this reading that I mentioned, the patriotic reading, I think that it accomplishes more of what Adichie wants to do with it when Nigerians read it. But I do think that it's not problematic that Americans are also so attracted to it.
I agree. And I also think it fits in with the other things I've seen and heard and read of hers. The speeches that she's given, the things she's written online, it feels like it could be for an American, but that it's really targeting Nigerians. I get the sense that she wants to lift Nigeria up. And to do that, she writes for Nigerian people. It just so happens that it works for Americans, and she spends a lot of time in the US, so it makes sense. But yeah, I get the feeling throughout this book and her other writings that America comes second to her.
In the first episode that we did in this series, I remember the kind of open question is whether we would find stories in these novels that were specific personal stories that were important to Nigerian readers. and how that would relate to us as non-Nigerians. And I think that this novel very much, it allows us to relate, it allows us to sympathize, but I do not feel that this is specifically for me. I think that this is specifically for a Nigerian audience, and I think that it is important to them in a much different way than it's important to me. I think for me, this novel is a curiosity. It's interesting to see the way that Nigerians look at America and how that's similar to other groups that I'm familiar with, but it's not as significant as it would be if I were Nigerian.
I think where I intersect with this book is on the subject of immigration. As someone who's a child of immigrants, when I read this book and I read the parts that explicitly talk about immigration, that really speaks to me. So for me, and I don't know if this is something that's exclusive to an American audience, but I think it is definitely more American than Nigerian just because there are a lot of people who are immigrating to America. Like, I don't think there are as many people immigrating to Nigeria. It's a different kind of conflict. And what she presents in this book, the difficulties of an immigrant, I think that is something that is very American, even though she takes pains to kind of code it in a very Nigerian way. You know, she isn't just talking about immigrants in general, she's talking about how African immigrants are forced to inhabit a certain kind of blackness. That's coding it with an African point of view, but in the end, it is still about immigration to me.
What if we carry it one step further? Is this for a general Nigerian audience, or is this for a Nigerian middle class audience that has the possibility of being in America? Because this is a possibility that's not open to everybody. Like, how do the lower classes feel about this kind of fiction?
Yeah, I think this is something that I think I noted in the last episode. There is a measure of privilege here. It's a very middle class book. So I think the audience is that middle class Nigeria. I don't think it's the farmer in Nigeria, you know, that cattle farmer who gets killed by a roving gang that's referenced in the book.
Yeah, my guess though is that this kind of looking at America longingly from afar is prevalent enough in Nigeria that there is something that a lot of people in the country can latch on to, but I think it's more hooky for people who have this image of America as an attainable place. For those people, I think very specifically, it's speaking directly to them.
All right, on that note, let's stop. Thank you for listening. Next week, we will review Stay With Me by Ayobami Adebayo. We've got an updated reading schedule on Reddit at Canonical Pod. If you'd like to talk about the topics we just discussed, you can find us there. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Also, if you enjoyed this podcast, please give us a review on Apple or your podcast platform of choice. Till next time, happy reading. We'll talk to you soon.